Hello, Gold Silver family. Alan Hibbard here with another video, and today I want to present what I think is the second worst way of describing the value proposition of money: scarcity. So, if you or someone you know is still using the term scarcity to describe the value proposition of gold or why fiat currency is not valuable, then you need to watch this video. So in this video, I want to explain why scarcity is simply not a very good and not very complete explanation of why something is money. And I want to explain a certain property of money that is much better to use than the term scarcity. And in order to do this, I'm going to present three common questions that I hear related to scarcity, and I want to explain them in detail. So our first one is this: if gold is valuable because of its scarcity, then shouldn't more scarce metals be even more valuable? Okay, great question. And relatedly, why don't we use those metals, the more scarce ones, as money instead of gold? So, really, two distinct questions. Let me answer the first one first. So, if gold is valuable because of its scarcity, then shouldn't more scarce metals be even more valuable? Okay, so actually, implied in the question itself is a suppressed premise that scarcity and value are proportional. And while I agree that if something already is valuable, then scarcity probably will make it even more valuable. But scarcity doesn't give something value. And it's pretty easy to see why. You can imagine all kinds of things that are rare or scarce, even one of a kind objects, and they're pretty worthless, right? You can think of pretty much anything that an amateur creates, whether it's, amateur carpentry or drawing or painting or crocheting, right? If you just make one thing, it's one of a kind. But if you're a beginner at it, it's probably not very good, and it's certainly not worth a lot, right? It might be valuable to you to perform that activity and to learn, but it's not valuable to other people. So we certainly wouldn't pay a high price for anything like that. So I think it's easy to see with just a little bit of thought that value and scarcity are not proportional. And just because something is scarce, it doesn't automatically become valuable. Okay, getting back to the question here, if gold is valuable because of its scarcity, I would argue that the value comes from other things, and to the extent that it's scarce, maybe that amplifies its value. But that's what the rest of this video is for. So shouldn't more scarce metals be even more valuable? Okay, let's look at that in a few charts, and then we're going to come back and answer this other question in a moment. So first of all, how are we defining scarcity? I mean, we think we know what it means. There's not a lot of something. Okay, pretty simple. But how do we define it specifically, and how do we measure it? Because this actually is going to affect how scarce something is relative to other things. So just as a thought experiment, ask yourself which of these definitions you would use to define scarcity. We've got five choices here. Is it the total supply of something in the universe? Is it the total supply of something inside planet Earth, like in the crust? Is it the total supply of something on planet Earth above ground? Is it the amount of new supply extracted each year by Earthlings, right? All of our humans and our machines and robots and so forth? Or none of the above? Is it something else? So when someone describes scarcity, which definition are they using? One of these or something else? Well, the total supply of something in the universe, really, whether we're talking about gold or anything else, the universe is pretty big, infinitely large, we think. And so that means there's kind of infinite of everything in the universe: gold, silver, carbon, oxygen. I mean, there's just like infinite. There's just, you're never going to run out. So I don't think scarcity applies on that scale. Okay. Now, for the other ones, I actually want to look at each of them and give you a chart of how scarce gold is compared to other metals based on each of these three definitions. So first, how rare is gold relative to other metals inside the Earth's crust? And this is measured in parts per million. And you can see gold here, there's 0.004 parts per million inside Earth's crust. And gold is not as scarce as some of these other metals, but it is more scarce than certain metals. So here, by the way, we do have the 8 precious metals, and I also added copper. I thought that might be interesting just to see as a reference point. It's also worth noting that this scale is logarithmic. So every time you go up a fixed distance, you're multiplying by a certain amount, in this case, 10. And so we see that gold is not the most rare. It's also not the most common. And so we might think all these other metals, boy, those are more rare. Should they be more valuable? Should those be money instead? Okay, that's the rarity in Earth's crust. What about above ground? Here are above ground stockpiles. And again, you see gold and silver are not among the most rare. They're not. So you would think that, man, shouldn't all these other metals be more valuable? Maybe their price per ounce should be higher. Maybe they would make better money. Should I buy them? Right? I had a friend who reached out to me and said, should I buy rhodium? I heard it's even more rare than gold. Right? So this is a common question that people have. But no is kind of the answer. Is the answer to that. I would not buy that. Okay, so above ground stockpiles, it almost looks like gold and silver are abundant. Instead of using the word scarce, I might even call them abundant just looking at this metric. Okay, so gold, by the way, is 1,000 times more abundant than a lot of these rarer ones down here, and copper 1,000 times more abundant than gold. Interesting. Okay, well, how about the annual production? How much we dig up out of the ground each year? Well, again, gold and silver are not among the rarest, not even close, right? Of the precious metals, these are the two most abundant. Again, there's that word again. So scarcity almost doesn't feel like it applies. It feels like a misnomer. Very interesting. So you might scratch your head and say, well, if these aren't the most scarce, why do we use them as money? Why are they so valuable? Shouldn't we be using the other ones? And why would gold and silver be money for thousands of years, even though they're, again, so abundant relatively? Well, here's the answer to the question. If you divide those last two charts together, the annual production divided by the total above ground stockpile, you get the annual inflation rate. And here, when we do that for all the metals, we see the answer to the question of why have gold and silver been money for thousands of years. It's because they have the lowest inflation rate. Okay, so if you take the total amount that we produce each year and divide it by the total amount we already have above ground, you get the inflation rate, and you see that they're the lowest. So these are the hardest to inflate. So it's relative. This is what makes them scarce. So when people talk about scarcity, they're talking about how hard it is to inflate the supply each year on a relative basis. All these other elements are fairly easy to inflate. You got over 100% inflation in some cases. So you definitely wouldn't want to hold that as money. By the way, the inverse of this, if you take this chart and divide it into 100, you get what's called the stock to flow ratio. So these are the exact same numbers, just divided into 100. And you see that gold has the highest stock to flow ratio. So the existing stock above ground divided by the annual flow. Silver, of course, is number 2, and then everything else follows. So that is why gold and silver have been money, among other things, right? But this is the main reason why they've been money in the spirit of scarcity. It's not because of any one particular quantity is scarce. It's actually kind of abundant, surprisingly. It's the ratio of them that is low or scarce. But I think there's a better word for this, and I'll explain that in just a second. So getting back to our question, if gold is valuable because of its scarcity, then shouldn't more scarce metals be even more valuable? Well, I kind of reject both premises of this question. Gold isn't valuable just because of its scarcity. We just saw it's kind of abundant. And also, value and scarcity are not proportional or even causal. So gold is valuable for a lot of other reasons, the 12 properties of money. And it's also arduous, which I'm going to show you in just a second. Why don't we use those other metals as money instead of gold? Okay, here, let's take a look at this. These are the 12 properties of money, and this comes from my upcoming series, Hidden Secrets of Value. I've been thinking about these topics for nearly 20 years, and basically those other metals fail in these 12 properties of money. They don't make for good money for a few different reasons. Some of them aren't durable. They're actually brittle and they crumble. Some of them aren't very divisible, so they have a really high melting point. So it takes a lot of energy to melt down a larger piece and make it into smaller ones. And conversely, it would take the same amount of energy to melt down the smaller pieces if you wanted to recombine them into a larger piece. So a lot of these metals aren't very divisible. Some aren't liquid, like they don't have a market where you can see what the price is at any given moment. And they're not arduous. That's what we've just been talking about. These metals are not arduous. Gold and silver are arduous. It takes so much energy to make more of them, to inflate the supply by any given number. So that's a really, really important property of money. And that is one of the main reasons why gold and silver have been money for thousands of years. They're arduous. They're not really scarce. It's so weird to say that. It's so weird to think that, but they're arduous. That's the important thing. So just like Mike Maloney distinguishes between money and currency, and so do I think it's a great distinction, right? Tons of people call dollars money, but they probably shouldn't. They should call it currency. Well, I'm starting to feel the same way about the value proposition of gold. Tons of people call it scarce. Really, we should be calling it arduous. It's arduous. It's so hard to inflate the supply, and that's what gives it its value. And conversely, dollars are not very arduous. You can inflate their supply very, very easily. A couple more questions here. I think you're already going to know the answers to these because of what we've talked about. Number 2, isn't it true that gold is technically infinite in the universe because new gold is made whenever neutron stars collide? So gold isn't scarce, right? Well, yeah, we talked about this. So technically, gold is infinite in the universe. Yes, because new gold is made all the time. I'm not sure that's a relevant scope if we're going to talk about scarcity of anything, but yes, that's true. So gold isn't scarce, right? Okay, well, I just said a whole lot of things about scarcity and how I think arduous is probably a better descriptor than scarce, but ultimately, whether or not you call something scarce is up to you. It depends on the definition you want to use. It depends on the context. Everything we're talking about here is about building mental models so we can make better decisions in the world. So it's not about being right and then saying everyone else is wrong. It's not about just living on a moral high horse. It's all about making good decisions. And in order to make good decisions, you have to have good mental models. And so if you're going to be casual about your definition of scarcity and change it every time you use it, you're going to have fuzzy mental models, you're going to make fuzzy decisions, and you're going to get bad results in life. So it's up to you if you want to call gold scarce or not. I think arduous is a better word, and it's for all those reasons I just gave. So if you understand those concepts, that's far more important than what word you choose to describe it. Question 3, my teeth are scarce and pretty useful. So why aren't they worth billions of dollars? And this is a question that was posed by Katie Martin, a markets columnist for the Financial Times, in her documentary that came out earlier this year on MicroStrategy, which has since changed its name to Strategy. So that's a Bitcoin related documentary. And she's been trying to understand the value proposition of Bitcoin for 7 or 8 years, I believe. And so she interviewed the CEO of that company, like the most famous kind of Bitcoin related company, MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor. And she asked this question. She posed this question to the audience. My teeth are scarce and pretty useful. So why aren't they worth billions of dollars? Because she keeps hearing the value proposition of gold and Bitcoin as, well, it's really scarce. It's really scarce, so it's valuable. And it doesn't click in her mind. And I don't blame her. I think it's a terrible, terrible explanation. So why aren't your teeth worth billions of dollars? It's pretty simple. The value of anything is related to the problem that it solves. So your teeth solve a pretty simple problem. You need to chew food. You could also say it solves the problem aesthetically. When you open your mouth, people expect it to look a certain way. Okay, so there's value in not surprising them with like an empty mouth or something strange. Okay, but the value of teeth is basically chewing food. And so if you lost your teeth, what would it cost you to replace them? Not that much, a couple $100, maybe a couple thousand. You might have to pay labor for someone to mess around in there, but it's not that much. So if the replacement cost isn't very high, then the actual cost isn't going to be that high, and the value to you isn't going to be that high. So no one would pay a lot for teeth because it doesn't do anything. It doesn't solve a problem for them, right? And to the extent that it does solve a problem, they can solve that problem more cheaply with something else. So that's why anybody's teeth aren't worth billions of dollars. Hopefully now you understand why scarcity is a pretty bad way of describing the value proposition of gold and silver, or money more broadly. And I do want to remind you that I have an upcoming series, Hidden Secrets of Value, where I go through all the foundational concepts that I've been thinking about for 20 years that I wish was contained somewhere when I was starting my saving and investing journey. So I put all that together for you. And I also developed one cohesive theory that I put in episode 4 called the physics of money. It's the one single idea that unites all these principles, all the 12 properties of money into one single idea. I've never heard it elsewhere. I didn't read it in a book. I never heard it on a podcast. It's completely my own idea. I think you're going to love it. And I think it's a beautiful mental model that makes all kinds of value judgments so much easier. So check it out. And thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.